Look, I'm going to be straight up with you guys because I need to get this off my chest, and honestly, after what I discovered today, I'm shaking with rage and I need people to know what kind of scum I've been dealing with. 3 years ago, my life got completely turned upside down. I was 24, working my butt off at a construction management company, saving every penny I could because I was planning to propose to my girlfriend Samantha. We'd been together since college, lived together for 2 years, and I thought I had my whole future mapped out. My younger brother Aaron was finishing up his business degree and living in our family's rental property about 20 minutes away. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. The first red flag should have been when Aaron started showing up at our apartment more often. He'd always been the golden child. Better grades, better social skills, better everything according to my parents. But he was my brother and I loved the guy, so when he said he was having a rough time with some girl drama and needed to hang out more, I welcomed him. Samantha seemed to really enjoy his company too, which made me happy. They'd watch movies together when I was working late, she'd cook for him, they'd joke around. I thought it was great that my girl and my brother were getting along so well. The second red flag was when Samantha started becoming distant. Less physical affection, more time spent on her phone, always tired when I got home from work. When I tried to talk to her about it, she'd say she was just stressed about her job at the marketing firm, or that I was being paranoid. She'd flip it around and make it seem like I was the problem for even bringing it up. Classic manipulation, but I was too stupid and in love to see it then. The third red flag was Aaron suddenly having money for nice things. New clothes, expensive dinners, a lease on a BMW. When I asked him about it, he said he'd gotten some freelance consulting work. Made sense, since he was good with numbers and business stuff, so I didn't push it further. But here's the thing that really gets me. I knew something was wrong deep down. My gut was screaming at me for months. But every time I tried to bring up my concerns, both of them would gaslight me so hard that I'd end up apologizing for being suspicious. They were a team, working together to keep me in the dark, and I fell for it completely. The breaking point came on a Saturday in March 3 years ago. I'd been planning to propose that weekend, had the ring, had reservations at her favorite restaurant, the whole thing. But that morning I woke up feeling sick as hell, probably food poisoning from something I ate the night before. Samantha was already dressed and said she was meeting her friend Lily for brunch and shopping. She seemed almost relieved that I was staying home sick. Around noon, I was feeling better and decided to surprise her. I drove to the restaurant where she said they were going to eat, thinking I'd join them and maybe even hint about my proposal plans to Lily. When I got there, the hostess told me no one by Samantha's name had a reservation and she hadn't seen anyone matching her description. That's when it hit me like a truck. I drove straight to Aaron's place. His BMW was in the driveway. Samantha's Honda was parked around the corner like she was trying to hide it. I sat in my car for probably 20 minutes, just staring at those vehicles, trying to convince myself there was some innocent explanation. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me? Maybe Lily was inside too and I just missed seeing her car. But no. Deep down, I knew exactly what was happening. I used my key to get into Aaron's place. Our parents had given me a spare years ago for emergencies. The house was quiet, but I could hear voices upstairs. I crept up, every step feeling like it was echoing through my entire body. Their voices got clearer as I got closer to his bedroom. That's when I heard Samantha say something that made me freeze completely. She was talking about how much she loved being with Aaron, how different he was from me, how she'd been wanting to break up with me for months but hadn't figured out how to do it without losing the apartment and the financial security I provided. Then Aaron said something about how I was too stupid to ever figure it out and that he'd always gotten everything he wanted that I had first. I stood there listening to them trash me for probably 10 minutes. Samantha talked about how boring I was, how Aaron was better in bed, how she was only staying with me until she figured out her next move. Aaron kept talking about how easy it had been to seduce my girlfriend and how I deserved it for always thinking I was better than him. He said I'd always gotten the praise from our parents for being responsible and hardworking. But now he was taking the one thing that mattered most to me. The worst part? They were laughing. Actually laughing about how clueless I was. I didn't confront them that day. I know, you're probably thinking I should have burst in there and caused a scene. But something else took over in that moment. Instead of rage, I felt this ice-cold clarity. I realized that if I confronted them right then, they'd just make excuses, gaslight me more, maybe promise to stop, and I'd probably be stupid enough to believe them. Instead, I quietly left and drove home. I put the engagement ring back in my safe, and I started planning. See, here's what my cheating girlfriend and backstabbing brother didn't know about me. I'm really good at long-term planning. It's literally what I do for work. I manage construction projects that take years to complete, coordinating dozens of people and millions of dollars in resources. I know how to think 10 steps ahead and account for every possible variable. So instead of confronting them, I decided to let them think they were getting away with it. I started paying attention to everything, their schedules, their habits, their weaknesses. I documented their relationship without them knowing. I started making strategic changes to my own life, building up resources and positioning myself for what I knew was coming. For 3 years, I've been the perfect boyfriend to Samantha. Supportive, loving, completely oblivious. I even proposed to her 8 months ago, and she said yes with tears in her eyes. Real tears, because she probably felt guilty as hell but was too deep in to back out. We've been planning our wedding for months now. Aaron has been the perfect brother too. Best man at our wedding, helping with planning, acting like he's so excited for us. Even gave a heartfelt speech at our engagement party about how perfect we were together and how much he loved seeing me happy. The whole time, I've been building my case and preparing for this moment. Today was supposed to be our final venue walkthrough before the wedding next month. Everything was set up perfectly. Flowers, tables, the works. I was hanging decorations in the back while Samantha was supposedly checking on some last-minute details with the coordinator. But then I heard voices from the bathroom near the reception hall. Samantha and her maid of honor, Audrey, were having a very interesting conversation. Samantha was telling Audrey that she couldn't wait for the wedding to be over so she could finally stop pretending. She said Aaron had been pressuring her to leave me for months, but she wanted to secure everything first. The joint bank accounts, the apartment lease with both our names on it, access to my savings for the honeymoon we'd already paid for. She wanted to make sure she could take as much as possible when she left. But here's the kicker. Audrey apparently didn't know about Aaron. When she asked who Samantha was planning to leave me for, Samantha said it was my own brother and that they'd been seeing each other for over 3 years. She said Aaron had convinced her that I was too weak and boring for her, that she deserved someone more ambitious and exciting. Audrey sounded shocked and tried to tell Samantha that what she was doing was horrible, especially with my brother. But Samantha just laughed and said I'd never suspect anything because I trusted both of them completely. She said after the honeymoon, she'd probably pick a fight with me about something stupid, move out dramatically, and take Aaron with her to another state where they could start fresh with my money. I finished hanging those decorations like my life depended on it. My hands were steady, my focus was laser sharp, because finally, after 3 years of planning and waiting, it was time to execute everything I'd been preparing for. I walked out of that venue with a smile on my face and told Samantha the place looked perfect for our big day. I kissed her cheek and told her I loved her. I shook hands with Aaron and thanked him for being such an amazing brother and best man. Then I went home and made some phone calls, because here's what they don't know. I've spent 3 years making sure that when this moment came, I'd have every advantage. I've been documenting their relationship through social media patterns, credit card statements, and phone records. I've been building my own financial independence while they thought I was just being responsible. I've been cultivating relationships with people who matter. And most importantly, I've been patient enough to let them dig their own graves. Tomorrow morning, Samantha is going to wake up to some very interesting surprises. Aaron, too. And by the time our wedding date arrives next month, they're both going to understand exactly what happens when you betray someone who thinks strategically and plans for every contingency. The best part? Everything I'm about to do to them is completely legal and will come from their own actions and choices. I'm not going to break any laws or hurt anyone physically. I'm just going to make sure they face the natural consequences of their decisions, with a little strategic pressure applied at exactly the right moments. 3 years of planning are about to pay off. And honestly, I can't wait to see their faces when they realize how badly they underestimated me. Part 2 coming soon. Because trust me, this is just the beginning. Update 1. Holy hell, you guys. The comments on my last post were incredible, and honestly, reading them gave me even more confidence that I was doing the right thing. Shout out to everyone who said I should document everything. I was already 10 steps ahead of you on that one. So yesterday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. and started making my moves. The first call went to our apartment complex manager, Pedro. See, what Samantha doesn't know is that when we renewed our lease 8 months ago, I had them add a clause that requires both tenants to provide 30 days written notice before adding anyone to the lease or making any major changes. I also requested that any lease violations be reported to both tenants immediately. Pedro and I have a good relationship because I always pay rent early, and I've helped him with some construction advice on building repairs. When I explained that I had evidence my fiancé was planning to move someone else into our apartment without following proper procedures, he was very interested in hearing more details. The second call went to my cousin Cody, who works at the bank where Samantha and I have our joint checking and savings accounts. Now, before anyone jumps down my throat, I wasn't doing anything illegal. But Cody helped me understand exactly what my rights were regarding those accounts, and what documentation I'd need to make certain changes. The third call was to my buddy from work whose wife runs a catering company. Remember how Samantha and I had already put down deposits for our wedding venue, flowers, and catering? Well, turns out there are some very specific clauses in those contracts about what happens when engagements are called off. By 8 a.m., I had all my documentation ready, and I was sitting at our kitchen table when Samantha came stumbling out of the bedroom in her pajamas looking for coffee. She seemed surprised I was already up and dressed. I told her we needed to talk about what I'd overheard at the venue yesterday. The look on her face was priceless. Pure panic for about 2 seconds before she switched into manipulation mode. She immediately started with the whole innocent act, asking what I meant and saying she had no idea what I was talking about. So I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of their bathroom conversation. Yeah, I recorded it. Sue me. Watching her face cycle through denial, anger, and then back to manipulation was like watching a masterclass in toxic behavior. She tried to claim the recording was somehow fake or taken out of context. When that didn't work, she switched to saying I was violating her privacy by recording her without consent. Then she tried to flip the whole thing and make it about how I obviously didn't trust her if I was spying on her. But here's where 3 years of planning paid off. I didn't let her derail the conversation or gaslight me. I stayed completely calm and methodical. I told her I had documentation going back almost 3 years showing the timeline of her relationship with Aaron. Credit card statements showing meals and hotels paid for when she was supposedly with friends. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between them at times when she claimed to barely talk to him. Social media data showing location patterns that proved they were together when she said she was somewhere else. The more evidence I presented, the more desperate she became. She started crying and begging, saying it had only been a few times and that she loved me and wanted to make it work. When I didn't buy that, she got angry and started yelling about how I was controlling and obsessive for tracking all this information. She said I was the one with problems for spending 3 years documenting everything, instead of just talking to her about my concerns. That's when I explained that I had tried to talk to her about my concerns multiple times over the years, and each time she'd made me feel like I was crazy for even questioning her. I reminded her of specific conversations where she'd accused me of being paranoid and jealous when I'd brought up my suspicions about her and Aaron. The whole conversation went in circles for over 2 hours. She kept trying different tactics: tears, anger, bargaining, blame shifting, you name it. But I stayed focused on the facts and my documentation. Around 10 a.m., Aaron showed up. Apparently, Samantha had texted him asking him to come over because I was having some kind of breakdown and making up stories about them. The irony was not lost on me. Aaron walked in acting all concerned and brotherly, asking me what was wrong and saying Samantha had told him I was upset about something. So I played the recording for him too. His reaction was different from Samantha's. Where she went through multiple emotional stages, Aaron just got immediately defensive and aggressive. He started talking about how I'd always been jealous of him and how this was just another example of me trying to make him look bad. He said I'd been competing with him our whole lives and that I couldn't handle the fact that sometimes he got things I wanted. That's when the real truth started coming out. Aaron admitted that yes, he'd been seeing Samantha, but he framed it like I had somehow driven her to it by being a bad boyfriend. He said she'd come to him for emotional support because I was always working and never paid attention to her needs. He claimed he'd tried to encourage her to talk to me about our relationship problems, but that she was scared of my reaction. The gaslighting was unreal. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor by being there for my girlfriend when I wasn't. Like he was the victim in all this because he'd been torn between loyalty to his brother and wanting to help someone in need. But then I asked him to explain the financial aspects. How he'd suddenly had money for expensive clothes and car payments over the past 3 years when his freelance consulting work was supposedly inconsistent. How he'd been able to afford taking Samantha on weekend trips and fancy dinners. That's when things got really interesting. Turns out Aaron had been accepting money from Samantha for months. Not just small amounts either. She'd been giving him cash from our joint account to help pay for their dates and gifts. Money that I'd assumed was going toward wedding expenses or being saved for our future. When I confronted Samantha about this, she broke down completely. She admitted that she'd been taking money from our savings to fund her relationship with Aaron. She said she'd planned to replace it all after our wedding when she had access to more of my assets and the cash gifts we'd receive. Aaron tried to defend this by saying he'd just been accepting help during a difficult time and that he'd planned to pay it all back eventually. He said I was being petty for caring about money when the real issue was that Samantha wasn't happy in our relationship. That conversation lasted another 2 hours. Both of them kept trying to make me the villain in the situation. According to them, I was controlling for tracking their activities, paranoid for not trusting them, selfish for caring about money, and emotionally unavailable for not recognizing that Samantha was unhappy. But here's the thing. I wasn't falling for any of it this time. Every time they tried to shift blame or change the subject, I brought the conversation back to their specific actions and choices. I made them explain and defend every lie, every betrayal, every manipulation over the past 3 years. By 2 p.m., they'd both exhausted their arguments and started getting desperate. Aaron suggested that maybe we could work something out as a family, that we could all move past this if I was willing to forgive and forget. Samantha begged me to consider couples counseling and said she'd do anything to save our relationship. That's when I told him about the phone calls I'd made that morning. I explained that Pedro was expecting a written statement from me about unauthorized use of our apartment for romantic relationships that violated our lease terms. I told him that I'd already contacted our bank about suspicious transactions from our joint account and that they were launching an internal review. I mentioned that our wedding vendors were very interested to learn about the fraud involved in deposits paid with money that had been taken without proper authorization. The panic in their eyes was beautiful. Aaron started asking what I meant about the apartment lease violation, and I explained that having his girlfriend stay over multiple nights per week without being on the lease was a clear violation that could result in immediate eviction for both of us. Samantha wanted to know what I meant about fraud with the wedding vendors, so I told her that paying deposits with money taken from joint accounts without the other account holder's knowledge for a wedding that was planned under false pretenses could be considered a form of financial deception. Both of them tried to argue that I was being vindictive and that I was going to hurt myself as much as them with these actions. Aaron said I was destroying our family over something that could be fixed if I just gave them a chance. Samantha cried and said I was ruining both our lives out of spite, but I'd already thought through all the consequences. Every move I was making had been planned for months. I knew exactly how each action would affect me versus how it would affect them, and I'd positioned myself to come out ahead in every scenario. The conversation finally ended when I told them both that they had 48 hours to figure out their next steps because major changes were coming whether they liked it or not. I suggested they spend that time deciding how they wanted to handle the situation moving forward, because I was done being lied to and manipulated. Aaron stormed out saying I'd regret destroying our family relationship over this. Samantha locked herself in our bedroom and has been alternating between crying and sending me texts, begging me to reconsider. But guys, I'm just getting started. What they don't realize is that everything I did yesterday was just the opening move. I've got documentation going back 3 years, relationships with people in positions that matter, and financial resources they don't know about. Tomorrow, I start phase 2, and that's when they're really going to understand the difference between someone who reacts emotionally and someone who plans strategically. The best part is that everything I'm doing is completely within my legal rights and is based on their own choices and actions. I'm not breaking any laws or doing anything unethical. I'm just making sure they face the natural consequences of their decisions, with a little strategic pressure applied at exactly the right moments. Part 3 coming soon because this is nowhere near over. Update 2. Guys, the amount of support I've gotten from you all has been incredible. Some of you have been asking for more details about my planning process. And honestly, sharing this with people who actually understand what betrayal feels like has been therapeutic as hell. So phase 2 started exactly 48 hours after my last conversation with Samantha and Aaron. I'd given them time to stew in their panic and maybe come up with some kind of strategy, which they absolutely did. But what they didn't realize is that I'd been anticipating their moves for months. Wednesday morning, I got a text from Samantha asking if we could meet at the coffee shop near our apartment to talk things through calmly. She said she'd spent the last 2 days thinking about everything and wanted to find a way to work things out that didn't destroy everyone's lives. Classic manipulation tactic, framing it like I was the one being destructive when she was the one who had been lying and stealing for 3 years. I agreed to meet her, but I brought my own recording device because I knew she was going to try some new angle to get me to back down from the consequences I'd set in motion. She showed up looking like she hadn't slept in days, which honestly she probably hadn't. The first thing she did was try to hug me and act like we were just having a normal relationship discussion. When I stepped back and kept things formal, she switched to the wounded victim act. She started talking about how she understood that I was hurt and angry, but that destroying our relationship and her relationship with Aaron wasn't going to fix anything. She said she'd made mistakes, but that everyone deserves forgiveness and a second chance. She kept emphasizing how much we'd built together and how much we both had to lose if I continued down this path. When I didn't respond with the sympathy she was expecting, she shifted tactics again. She started talking about our families and how this was going to hurt our parents and damage relationships that had nothing to do with what happened between us. She said Aaron was worried about what this would do to his future career prospects and that I was being selfish by not considering the collateral damage of my actions. That's when I realized they'd spent the last 48 hours coordinating their response strategy. This wasn't Samantha speaking from the heart. This was a carefully planned attempt to make me feel guilty for holding them accountable for their own choices. So I asked her directly what she thought a fair resolution would look like. Her proposal was basically that I should forget everything I'd discovered, continue with our wedding as planned, and pretend the last 3 years of betrayal never happened. In exchange, she promised that her relationship with Aaron would end immediately and that she'd be completely transparent with me going forward. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted me to reward her deception by giving her exactly what she'd been scheming to take: marriage, financial security, and social status, while Aaron got to walk away with no consequences for his role in destroying his own brother's relationship. I told her that her proposal showed she still didn't understand the gravity of what she'd done or respect me enough to acknowledge the real harm she'd caused. I explained that this wasn't just about the affair. It was about 3 years of gaslighting, financial theft, and psychological manipulation that had made me question my own sanity. She got defensive and started arguing that she'd never tried to make me question myself, that I was exaggerating the psychological impact, and that calling it theft was unfair because we were engaged and planning to merge our finances anyway. She said I was being dramatic and vindictive instead of focusing on solutions. That 3-hour conversation ended with her crying and begging me to reconsider, saying she loved me and would do anything to fix things. But when I asked her to explain specifically what she loved about me and what she'd be willing to do to rebuild trust, her answers were vague and focused entirely on maintaining the status quo that benefited her. The next morning, I got a call from my mother asking if I could come over for dinner that weekend because she wanted to talk to me about something important. The tone in her voice told me that Aaron had already gotten to our parents with his version of events. I drove over to their house on Saturday afternoon and found Aaron's BMW in the driveway. Of course he was there, getting his story in first and trying to control the narrative before I had a chance to explain what had really happened. When I walked into the house, Aaron was sitting at the kitchen table with both our parents, and they all had these serious expressions like they were staging an intervention. My mother hugged me and said she was worried about me because Aaron had told them I was going through some kind of emotional crisis related to wedding stress and jealousy issues. Aaron had told them that Samantha and I were having relationship problems and that I'd become suspicious and paranoid about her friendship with him. According to his version, I'd been stalking and recording them, making wild accusations, and threatening to sabotage the wedding because I couldn't handle normal social interactions between my fiancé and my brother. My father asked me to sit down so we could talk through whatever was bothering me and figure out how to get me some help. He said Aaron was concerned about my mental state and that they all wanted to support me through this difficult time. The gaslighting was unreal. Aaron had positioned himself as the concerned brother, trying to help his unstable sibling, while painting me as someone who was having a breakdown and needed professional intervention. So I pulled out my phone and played them the recording from the venue bathroom, the same one where Samantha admitted to her 3-year affair with Aaron and her plans to take my money and leave me after the wedding. Watching my parents' faces change as they listened to that conversation was one of the most satisfying moments of this entire ordeal. My mother went pale, and my father's expression shifted from concerned to furious in about 30 seconds. Aaron tried to interrupt the recording multiple times, claiming it was taken out of context or edited somehow. But when it finished, there was dead silence for probably 2 full minutes. Then my father turned to Aaron and asked him to explain what they'd just heard. Aaron tried to deflect by saying I'd violated Samantha's privacy and that recording people without consent was illegal. He said even if the conversation was real, it didn't tell the whole story and that he'd been trying to help Samantha work through her relationship doubts in a healthy way. My mother asked him directly if he'd been having an affair with my fiancé for 3 years. Aaron's response was to attack me again, saying I'd always been jealous of him, and that this was just another example of me trying to make him look bad to our parents. But our parents weren't buying it this time. My father told Aaron to stop deflecting and answer the question directly. When Aaron finally admitted that yes, he'd been involved with Samantha, but tried to frame it as something that just happened recently when she came to him for emotional support, my mother lost it completely. She started yelling about how disappointed she was in both of them, how betrayed she felt that Aaron would do this to his own brother, and how disgusted she was that he'd tried to manipulate them into thinking I was the problem. She said she couldn't believe she'd raised a son who would be capable of such cruelty and deception. Aaron tried to defend himself by saying that relationships are complicated and that he hadn't meant for things to develop the way they did. He claimed he'd tried to encourage Samantha to be honest with me, but that she was scared of my reaction. He said he'd been torn between loyalty to me and wanting to help someone he cared about. My father shut that down immediately. He said there was no excuse for betraying family, and that Aaron's attempts to justify his actions were making things worse, not better. He told Aaron that he was disgusted by his behavior and that he'd lost all respect for him as a son. The conversation devolved into a shouting match between Aaron and our parents that lasted over an hour. Aaron kept trying to minimize his actions and shift blame, while our parents demanded accountability and answers. Every time they cornered him on a specific point, he'd change the subject or attack my character instead of taking responsibility. Finally, Aaron stormed out saying that everyone was being unfair to him and that he was tired of being the family's scapegoat. He said he wasn't going to apologize for finding love with someone who appreciated him, and that if we couldn't accept his happiness, then that was our problem, not his. After he left, my parents spent another hour asking me about the timeline of events and expressing their shock that this had been going on for so long without them realizing it. My mother kept apologizing for not seeing through Aaron's lies and for initially believing his version of events. But here's the really satisfying part. My father asked me what I needed from them to move forward, and I told him I'd already handled most of the practical aspects myself. When he asked what I meant, I explained about the apartment lease violations, the bank account reviews, and the wedding vendor situations. My father smiled for the first time all day and said he was proud of me for thinking strategically instead of just reacting emotionally. He said it was clear I'd inherited his business sense and his ability to plan for multiple contingencies. Then he asked me if there was anything else they could do to support me through this situation. That's when I told them about Aaron's financial dependence on money taken from my joint account with Samantha and how that had been funding his lifestyle improvements over the past 3 years. My mother was horrified. She said she'd been proud of Aaron for becoming more financially responsible and successful, not realizing that his apparent prosperity was built on theft from his own brother. That's when my father made a decision that I honestly hadn't expected. He told me that Aaron had been borrowing money from them periodically over the past year for various expenses, always promising to pay them back once his consulting work picked up. Now that they understood where his money was really coming from, they wanted to make sure Aaron faced real consequences for his actions. My father said he was going to demand immediate repayment of everything Aaron owed them, with interest. He was also going to make it clear to Aaron that he was no longer welcome in their home until he made full restitution to me and took genuine responsibility for his actions. The conversation ended with my parents expressing their full support for whatever decisions I made about my relationship with Samantha and my future relationship with Aaron. They said they were ashamed of their younger son's behavior and proud of how I'd handled the situation with maturity and strategic thinking. By the time I left their house on Saturday evening, Aaron's entire support system had crumbled. His relationship with our parents was destroyed, his financial situation was about to become desperate, and his reputation in our family was completely ruined. But the best part was yet to come. On Sunday morning, I got a series of angry texts from Aaron blaming me for turning our parents against him and accusing me of manipulation and lies. He said I was destroying the family over jealousy and that everyone would eventually see through my act. He demanded that I meet him for lunch so he could explain his side of the story and convince me to back down from my revenge campaign before I destroyed both our futures. He said he had information that would change my perspective on everything and that I owed him a chance to defend himself. I agreed to meet him because, honestly, I was curious to see what his final desperate strategy would be. Plus, I had one more surprise planned that would complete his financial and social destruction. Phase 3 starts tomorrow, and after this meeting with Aaron, he's going to understand exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who's been planning your downfall for 3 years. Part 4 coming soon. The final confrontation where everything comes together. Final update. You guys, I can't even begin to describe how satisfying this final confrontation was. Aaron thought he had one last card to play, but I'd been anticipating his move for months. The look on his face when he realized I was 10 steps ahead of him was absolutely priceless. So Aaron and I met at this sports bar downtown on Monday afternoon. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days, which, honestly, he probably hadn't since our parents cut him off financially and emotionally, but he was still trying to project confidence and control like he always did when he was desperate. He started the conversation by acting like the reasonable one, saying he was glad I'd agreed to meet because he wanted to clear the air and find a solution that worked for everyone. He said he understood I was hurt and angry, but that we needed to think about the bigger picture and the long-term consequences of this family conflict. Then he launched into this elaborate justification for everything he'd done over the past 3 years. According to Aaron, he'd been trying to protect me from getting hurt by a woman who wasn't really committed to our relationship. He claimed that Samantha had been expressing doubts about marrying me for over a year, and that she'd confided in him about feeling trapped and unsure about our future together. He said he'd tried to encourage her to be honest with me about her feelings, but that she was scared of breaking my heart and destroying the life we'd built together. So he'd offered himself as emotional support during her period of confusion, and their relationship had developed naturally from there. The gaslighting was incredible. He was framing his betrayal as some kind of noble sacrifice, like he'd been doing me a favor by helping my fiancée work through her relationship doubts instead of letting her marry me while having reservations. But then he dropped what he thought was his nuclear option. He told me that Samantha was pregnant. He said she'd found out 2 weeks ago, and that's why she was so desperate to work things out with me. According to Erin, she was terrified that I'd abandon her if I knew the truth about the baby's paternity. So she'd been willing to say anything to salvage our relationship and secure her future. Erin claimed that this changed everything because now there was an innocent child involved who deserved a stable home and financial security. He said I needed to think beyond my own hurt feelings and consider what was best for everyone involved, including the baby. He suggested that the most mature solution would be for me to reconcile with Samantha, raise the child as my own, and let him quietly step back from the situation. He said this would give the baby the best possible life, preserve our family relationships, and allow everyone to move forward with dignity intact. The manipulation was breathtaking. He was trying to use an unborn child as a leverage to get me to accept his betrayal and reward Samantha's deception with exactly what she'd been scheming to take from me. But here's the thing Erin didn't know. I'd been tracking Samantha's activities so closely over the past 3 years that I knew her menstrual cycle better than she did. I knew exactly when she'd been with him versus when she'd been with me. And I knew for a fact that if she was pregnant, the timeline made it impossible for me to be the father. So I asked Erin to explain the math. If Samantha was 2 weeks pregnant, and she'd been with him exclusively for the past month while avoiding physical intimacy with me, how exactly did he think this baby could be mine? The panic in his eyes was beautiful. He started backtracking and claiming he'd gotten the timeline wrong, that maybe she was further along than he'd initially thought, that pregnancy dating was complicated and imprecise. But I pressed him for details. I asked him to explain specific dates and events, and his story kept changing. Finally, he admitted that, yes, the baby was probably his. But that didn't change the fundamental point about everyone needing to think about what was best for the child's future. That's when I told him about the conversation I'd had with Samantha the night before. See, after Erin had texted me demanding this meeting, I'd called Samantha and told her I knew about the pregnancy. I wanted to hear her version of the story before Erin tried to spin it his way. Samantha broke down completely and admitted that she'd found out about the pregnancy 3 weeks ago and had been terrified to tell either of us. She said she knew the baby was Erin's, but that she was hoping to convince me to take her back before she started showing, so she could present the child as a premature birth, and I'd never questioned the paternity. She also admitted that Erin had been pressuring her to use the pregnancy as leverage to get me to forgive them both. He told her that I'd never abandon a pregnant woman, and that this was their chance to turn the situation around and come out ahead. But here's the really beautiful part. During that phone conversation, Samantha also revealed something that Erin didn't know she'd told me. For the past 6 months, Erin had been talking about leaving our hometown and moving to another state where he could start fresh with a new career and no family drama. He'd been encouraging Samantha to take as much money as possible from our joint accounts and wedding fund so they could relocate together after she divorced me. But Erin had never told Samantha that he'd been borrowing money from our parents and had no plans to pay them back before leaving town. He'd let her believe that his financial resources were legitimate and sustainable, when in reality he was planning to skip town and leave everyone else to deal with the consequences of his debts and lies. When I told Erin that I knew about his secret relocation plans and his unpaid debts to our parents, he went completely silent for probably 2 full minutes. Then he started trying to explain that he'd just been exploring options for his future career and that he'd never made any concrete plans to leave without handling his responsibilities. But I had screenshots of apartment listings he'd saved in other states, job applications he'd submitted to companies hundreds of miles away, and travel searches for moving truck rentals. Samantha had sent me all of this information the night before, once she realized that Erin had been planning to abandon her too, once he got what he wanted from the situation. The conversation devolved into Erin desperately trying to convince me that I was misunderstanding his intentions and that he'd never planned to hurt anyone or leave town without making things right. He claimed that all his research had been hypothetical and that he was committed to staying local and taking responsibility for his actions. But then, I dropped my own nuclear option. I told Erin that Pedro had already started the eviction process for our apartment, based on the lease violations I'd documented. Samantha would be homeless within 30 days unless she could find somewhere else to live, and someone else to cover her share of the rent and deposits. I also told him that my cousin Cody had helped me separate all the joint accounts and freeze access to any funds that couldn't be clearly attributed to my income alone. Samantha's access to our savings was completely cut off, and the bank was conducting a review of all transactions over the past year to determine if any money had been transferred inappropriately. Most importantly, I told him that I'd contacted all our wedding vendors and explained the situation. Because the deposits had been paid with funds that were now under investigation, and because the wedding was being canceled due to fraud and deception, I was able to recover almost 70% of our wedding expenses. The vendors were keeping their cancellation fees, but Samantha was responsible for covering the full cost of any services she'd used or committed to. The financial pressure was immediate and devastating. Between the apartment eviction, the frozen bank accounts, and the wedding cancellation costs, Samantha was looking at probably $15,000 in immediate expenses with no access to the resources she'd been counting on. But I wasn't finished. I told Aaron that our father had demanded immediate repayment of all the money he'd borrowed over the past year, with interest, and that he had 2 weeks to come up with the full amount or face legal action for unpaid loans. Aaron tried to argue that our parents wouldn't actually take legal action against their own son, but I explained that our father had consulted with his business attorney and was treating this as a formal business matter, not a family issue. The loans had been documented, the terms had been clear, and Aaron's deception about his financial situation constituted fraud in the original lending agreement. The panic was complete. Aaron was facing homelessness, bankruptcy, and legal action from his own family, while trying to support a pregnant woman who had no other resources or support system. He spent the next hour begging me to reconsider, offering to pay back every penny he'd taken, promising to leave town permanently and never contact me or Samantha again, even suggesting that he'd sign away all parental rights to the baby if I'd just call off the financial and legal consequences. But I'd been planning this moment for 3 years. Every offer he made, every desperate bargain he proposed, I'd already anticipated and prepared for. I wasn't interested in his promises or his apologies because I knew they were only motivated by his desperation, not by genuine remorse or accountability. The lunch ended with Aaron storming out and saying I'd regret destroying my own family over jealousy, spite. But as he walked away, I knew that his threats were empty. He had no leverage left, no resources to fight back with, and no support system to help him recover from the consequences I'd engineered. That evening, I got a series of texts from Samantha begging me to reconsider everything because she was scared and didn't know how she was going to survive financially or emotionally. She said she'd made terrible mistakes, but that she was willing to do anything to make things right between us. I responded with a single message explaining that she and Aaron had made their choices every day for 3 years, and now they were experiencing the natural consequences of those decisions. I told her that I wished them both the best in figuring out their future together, but that I was no longer part of their story. Today is supposed to be our wedding day. Instead, I'm sitting in my new apartment. Yeah, I'd been planning that move for months too. Writing this update for you guys and feeling more peace and satisfaction than I've felt in 3 years. Aaron and Samantha are both facing financial ruin, social humiliation, and the reality of building a life together without the resources they'd been stealing from me. They're going to have to figure out how to support themselves and their baby with their own efforts and abilities, which honestly they should have been doing all along. Meanwhile, I've recovered most of my money, maintained my relationship with my parents, and freed myself from people who were actively working to destroy my life while pretending to love me. The best part is that everything I did was completely legal and based on their own choices and actions. I didn't break any laws or do anything unethical. I just made sure they faced the real-world consequences of their deception and theft, with strategic pressure applied at exactly the right moments to maximize the impact. 3 years of planning, and it worked out exactly the way I hoped it would. Sometimes patience and strategy really do pay off better than emotional reactions and forgiveness. Thanks for following along on this journey, guys. It feels good to finally have closure and justice.